In the blazing heart of the Egyptian desert, towering remnants of a distant past rise up. The pyramids, stone colossi that for thousands of years have defied not only the passage of time, but also our understanding. These architectural wonders, built with astonishing precision, are not only symbols of an ancient and glorious civilization, but also represent one of the most fascinating mysteries that history has left us as a legacy. While the official version tells us in detail about their meaning and purpose, if we carefully analyze these extraordinary structures, we find many anomalies that call the official account into question. In this video, we will explore and analyze all those mysteries that not only cast doubt on everything we thought we knew about this extraordinary civilization, but also open up new scenarios that revolutionize our entire understanding of the past. Well, before we set off on this extraordinary and mysterious journey, as always, we invite you to subscribe to the channel to support our work and to make sure you don't miss our new videos. The pharaonic history of Egypt began around 3000 BC and ended in 30 BC, thus covering a period of about 3,000 years. Over all this time, 31 dynasties succeeded one another, but the construction of the pyramids concerns only a small part of this history. In particular, the most important structures were built between the 3rd and 4th dynasties. The architectural evolution of these structures did not follow a linear path, but experienced incredible development during the 4th dynasty, only to regress in the following dynasties. But to better understand what we mean, let's look at a chart that shows the building volumes attributed to each pharaoh. Looking at it, we can clearly see that during the 4th dynasty, much more was built compared to other periods. This dynasty, which lasted only 90 years, saw the construction of the pyramids of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. But the volume shouldn't mislead us, because it's not just a matter of quantity, but also of construction quality. In fact, if we look closely, we notice that the 4th dynasty not only built more than the others, but also created works of superior quality. Looking at the pyramids built during the various dynasties, it's clear that neither the dynasties before nor those after the 4th dynasty had the same construction abilities. The superior quality of the 4th dynasty is undeniable. The pyramids built during that period are still standing, while those from other dynasties appear today in ruins. But how can this anomaly be explained? This marked difference can be explained by catastrophic events such as wars, plagues, or earthquakes. The issue is we lack historical evidence for such events. And moreover, there doesn't seem to be a great technological difference between the dynasties. On the contrary, if we exclude the 4th dynasty from our analysis, we notice a certain continuity in the building abilities of these ancient architects. At this point, it would be more correct to ask what happened during the 4th dynasty and what caused the loss of such building mastery in the following dynasties. If the reason why this incredible building ability developed during the 4th dynasty still remains a mystery. Another highly debated topic. According to the official theory, the pyramids were funerary monuments commissioned by the pharaohs. But are we really sure that they were? The first question we can ask ourselves to answer this is, how many bodies have been found inside the pyramids? The answer is very simple, none. But not only were the bodies not found, nor were any of the treasures the pharaohs were usually buried with. If we talk about tombs, pharaohs' tombs, we can't help but think of Tutankhamun and all the legends that have developed around this incredible discovery. In the pharaoh's tomb, numerous objects were found, including his chariot, canopies, and the sarcophagus itself. The curious fact, however, is that this tomb is not located in a pyramid, but is dug into the ground, in the region called the Valley of the Kings, hundreds of kilometers away from the main pyramids. Someone might object by saying that the Great Pyramid dates back to the 4th dynasty, while Tutankhamun belonged to the 18th dynasty, so over time the funeral rite might have changed, but as we will see, this is not correct. In 1925 near Giza, The tomb of Hetepheres I, the mother of Khufu, the pharaoh to whom Egyptologists attribute the construction of the Great Pyramid, was discovered. The objects found in this tomb are similar to those found in the Valley of the Kings, suggesting that funeral traditions may not have changed that much over time. However, Egyptologists explain that nothing was found inside the pyramids because over the years, they have been subjected to numerous acts of looting, which stripped them of all the treasures they contained. To verify if the Egyptologists' hypothesis is consistent, let's go back in time and rely on the words of Herodotus, the Greek historian considered the father of history, who lived in 484 BC. Herodotus, in his writings, provides an important first piece of information. At the time when he arrived in Egypt, the Great Pyramid was still covered with white limestone slabs, and the white stone made it shine in the desert, making it visible from very long distances. But Herodotus provides another important piece of information. According to what he learned, the tomb of Khufu would not be the Great Pyramid, but would be located on an island in the waters of the Nile.
This king had a canal dug from the Nile to the pyramid. The canal is long, wide, and deep, and it was dug to bring water around the place where the pyramid is located so that it is surrounded by water with the Nile encircling it. While the pyramid itself was built of white stone, smooth and well-worked, around it was built a terrace of black stone, smooth, similar to the stone used for many statues. Near the pyramid, on the north side, there is an underground tomb dug into the ground. It is said that the body of Khufu lies in it, and that it is surrounded by water, brought there by a canal from the Nile. Since the stone can be rotated like a door, one can enter and exit this tomb.
In 25 BC, we instead have the testimony of Strabo, the Greek historian, who is the first to provide us with a description of the interior of the Great Pyramid.
The pyramid itself, according to Eratosthenes, has a base of 7 stadia and a height of over 6. Its entrance is through a thin stone, which can be lifted by a lever made from a stick. The entrance leads to an underground passage, sloping for a length of 40 cubits, which leads to an underground chamber.
Strabo describes a descending passage that leads into an underground chamber, but this chamber is empty. It contains no treasure or evidence of the pharaoh inside. Another interesting account is that of Caliph al-Mamun, who in 820 AD entered the Great Pyramid. Not finding the entrance used by Strabon, he decided to create an opening by digging an entrance tunnel, which by a stroke of luck intersected the descending passage previously explored by Strabon. Al-Mamun also stated that he found the underground chamber empty, but he did not give up and continued his exploration. He dug another passage into the rock that led him to a new area, the one we now know as the Grand Gallery. The Grand Gallery is an ascending passage. The Caliph walked through it until he reached the 2 chambers, later called the Queen's Chamber and the King's Chamber, but once again both chambers were empty. Disappointed by this discovery, Al-Mamun decided to abandon the search for good. According to Egyptologists, the Caliph found the rooms empty because they had been looted previously. But at this point, it's fair to ask, if Al-Mamun had to break through the rocks to access the upper chambers, how did the tomb robbers get into the upper chambers? According to the official version, the looters had stolen the treasure through a passage called the Well Shaft. This passage, in fact, connects the Grand Gallery with the descending shaft discovered by Strabo. It is important to point out, however, that this tunnel is only 90 centimeters wide, narrows to 65 centimeters, and extends vertically for 60 meters. It must not have been easy at all for the thieves to lower themselves and the precious objects through this small shaft. Objects that, as we have seen previously, could also reach considerable sizes. But if we accept the idea that the pyramids were actually tombs, and that the objects and the pharaoh's body are missing because of the actions of tomb robbers, there is another question that needs to be answered. Why does official Egyptology attribute the construction of 3 pyramids to Pharaoh Snefru? Egyptologists suggest that most likely Snefru was not satisfied with the first two, or that maybe they had structural problems, and that's why he decided to build a third one. It's hard to argue with this explanation. We can only note that it's surprising that the pharaoh undertook 3 such projects, 2 of which were failures, and that he did this during a reign of just 50 years. Another question that's often raised is why there are 3 burial chambers inside the Great Pyramid, considering that the pyramid was supposed to house only one body, that of the pharaoh. The hypothesis for the 3 chambers is that the design changed during construction. The first 2 chambers, the underground chamber and the Queen's chamber, were supposedly abandoned due to changes in the design, and that's why they were never completed. In reality, this hypothesis took a hard hit in 1992, when the engineer Rudolf Guntenbrink, thanks to a small robot he invented, made an exceptional discovery. One piece of evidence that supports the theory of a design change is the length of the air shafts that start from the Queen's chamber. According to Egyptologists, these had remained incomplete, and for this reason they extended only a few meters in height. However, the robot created by Guntenbrink has completely disproved this belief. Once inserted into the shafts, it showed instead that these were not incomplete, but extended for over 60 meters, even passing beyond the king's chamber. To understand why this discovery disproves the theory of a change in design, we need to remember that the construction of the pyramid went from the bottom up, and that the chambers and all the shafts were not carved into the stone, but were the result of fitting together rocks that had been prepared beforehand. So if there had been a change in design, it would have made no sense to keep building the shafts. It would have just been a huge waste of time and resources. Another controversial and fascinating point concerns the methods and timing of the construction of the Great Pyramid. Over time, various hypotheses have been proposed. One of these suggests the construction of a straight ramp that rises as the structure grows. But while this hypothesis seems the simplest, once applied to reality, it shows enormous problems. The Pyramid of Khufu is 138 meters tall today. At the time of its construction, its height was about 146 meters. Now imagine how long this ramp had to be in order to have a slope that wasn't too steep and to allow men to pull the heavy blocks. In addition to this, the ramp had to be dismantled and rebuilt every time the structure became taller. We can say that building the ramp would have been more laborious than building the pyramid itself. Other theories suggest the construction of spiral ramps, either external or internal. If these hypotheses partly solve the problem of the difficulty of building a straight ramp, there is still one point that is not very clear: the construction time. Several independent researchers, you can find the links in the video description, have studied this aspect very thoroughly. Let's start with a fact we know well. We know that the Great Pyramid is made up of 2,415 stones. Egyptologists agree that its construction took about 20 years. Now let's pretend that all this pile of stones is already present at the base of the pyramid. We won't take into account the time needed for quarrying and transportation. To lay 2,415 stones in 20 years, you need to place one stone every 4 minutes and 21 seconds. And that's if you consider a 24-hour workday. If instead we consider daylight hours and assume that the construction site worked 12 hours a day, it would have been necessary to place a stone every 2 minutes or so. Now let's assume that the pyramid was built using ramps. Whether they were straight, spiral, or external, it doesn't matter. We know that a man can walk at an average speed of 4 kilometers per hour, but we have to consider the slope of the ramp and the weight of the large stones that the men had to transport. All of this obviously lowers the average speed, but let's make a generous estimate and assume that under these conditions, the average speed is 2.5 kilometers per hour. Now let's consider a ramp that is 200 meters long with a slope of 6 degrees. Under the conditions just described, a man would take about 2 minutes and 30 seconds to walk up the ramp and reach a height of about 22 meters. With this simple calculation, we go well beyond the 2 minutes estimated in the previous calculation, and we are considering a straight ramp that reaches 20 meters. But we know that the pyramid is actually much taller. Besides this, we're not taking into account that most likely they had to move through narrow passages, had to turn to go around the pyramid, and we're not considering the environmental conditions, the heat and the fatigue. Obviously, to all this, one could argue that the workers certainly weren't dragging just one block at a time, and that's definitely true. But how many blocks could they actually move at the same time, considering the space limitations of the ramps and the risk of collapses? Let's now look at a concrete example. In the 1960s, during the construction of the Aswan Dam, 2 temples at Abu Simbel were relocated to prevent them from being submerged. This gigantic project required the temples to be divided into stone blocks weighing from 20 to 30 tons each. It took 3 years to complete the work, and in the end, 1,035 blocks were moved. This means that each stone required about 25 hours of work. Let's use this data as a reference and consider only the largest blocks of the Great Pyramid, those weighing between 25 and 70 tons, which we know make up only 2% of the stones that make up the Great Pyramid. Now let's calculate all this based on a 12-hour workday. Well, it would take 133 years to put them all in place. One could counter this by stating that the temples were dismantled with absolute precision, and that this required more precise work compared to what was done in the Great Pyramid. But if we take that view, we must not forget that we are comparing technology from the 1960s with that of 4,000 years ago. And we're still only talking about 1% of the stones needed to build the Great Pyramid. It can also be argued that the pyramids had a higher priority than the temples near the dam, and that therefore it was possible to mobilize much more labor for the construction of the Great Pyramid. This is also true, but are we sure that it's really so obvious that it took this incredible number of men to build the pyramid, and that this instead did not risk paralyzing an entire country because of the pyramid? As we have seen, the methods that allowed the construction of the pyramids are far from being clarified. In fact, at the moment, there are more questions than answers. But there is another important question to solve. What were the pyramids used for? What is hidden in the depths of these extraordinary structures? Recently, the world of archaeology was shaken by an incredible discovery. A Japanese team, led by the renowned Egyptologist Zahi Hawass, revealed the existence of a secret tunnel, 9 meters long, hidden in the heart of the Great Pyramid of Giza. The tunnel is said to be located above the Grand Gallery, and according to Egyptologists, it could be the real chamber containing the remains of the pharaoh, which, as we recall, have never been found to this day. While this is certainly a revolutionary discovery, it is nothing compared to what the 2 Italian researchers claim to have discovered. Corrado Malanga and Filippo Biondi. 6 months before the Japanese team's discovery was announced, they published the results of their research in the scientific journal Remote Sensing. And not only did they identify the tunnel above the Grand Gallery found by the Japanese research group, but they also discovered many other rooms, not only inside the pyramid, but even up to 100 meters beneath it. To fully understand the significance of this discovery, however, we need to start from the beginning. But first, just a brief introduction. In this video, we won't discuss the criticisms from some scientists toward the 2 researchers, but we'll present their research. And in particular, we will delve into the deductions that Professor Malanga has presented about the use that an ancient people might have made of this incredible monument. Furthermore, for those who want to learn more and form their own opinion directly from Professor Malanga's study, in the video description, you will find the link to the research published in the scientific journal. And Biondi, to carry out their study, used SAR, the synthetic aperture radar, but they applied a small yet ingenious modification to it. SAR, as many of you know, is an advanced radar technology that uses radar data processing to create high-resolution images of the Earth's surface. To achieve this result, an antenna about 6 meters long is installed on a satellite, and as it moves along a predetermined path, It simulates the effect of a much larger antenna and allows for capturing very detailed images of the Earth's surface. The radar works by emitting electromagnetic radiation that, after reflecting off objects, returns to the satellite with detailed information. This system is used for environmental measurements. For example, it is able to detect vibrations in the Earth's ice with millimeter precision. SAR is therefore a technology that has been in use for quite some time, but it is not able to see beneath the Earth's surface.
Come hanno fatto quindi I due ricercatori ad
Furthermore, according to Malanga and Biondi, it was enough to make a small modification to the software used to look inside the Great Pyramid.
With the trick that was basically a software modification of the programs used, we enabled the radar to look inside the pyramid. Keep in mind that what we do is modify, switch an electromagnetic signal into a sound phononic signal, that is, a vibrational one. So when we do more scans, we emit more signals. More information comes back to us from the radar. In just a few millionths of a second, between one scan and the next, we can see the differences in the displacement of the material's vibration. The pyramid thus becomes a transparent object because phonons enter things like granite better than electromagnetic waves, which cannot penetrate it.
So Malanga and Biondi, thanks to this system and repeated scans, managed to obtain a detailed image of the inside of the Pyramid of Giza, which becomes practically transparent and allows us to see everything it contains.
By using this technique, it's as if you have a three-dimensional model of the pyramid at your disposal, which can be virtually sectioned to examine its interior, just like you cut a cake into different slices to examine its layers.
If this is a brief summary of the technology used by the two researchers, now let's focus on what they claim to have found hidden.
What you see is something incredible. There are at least 2 corridors that start from beneath the pyramid, about 100 meters deep. And they rise like the 2 prongs of a tuning fork made of stone, and these rise and reach ground level. Inside the pyramid there are 2 rooms. From these 2 rooms, 2 other corridors start, which go up to about 100 meters in height and are joined by a single corridor. From this single corridor, another corridor starts, which completely surrounds the structure called Z, and which is above the room commonly known as the King's Chamber.
The Great Pyramid would therefore hide many other rooms inside it that are still unknown today. But that's not all. Even 100 meters below the pyramid, there would be mysterious structures. This is what the 2 researchers claim to have identified underground and among the granite blocks of the Great Pyramid. This is undoubtedly a shocking discovery, which completely changes what we thought we knew about the Great Pyramid until now. But why would the ancient Egyptians have built this incredible pyramid? Professor Malanga has an explanation for all of this. As we have seen, a series of corridors start from the depths and rise up to surround the King's Chamber and the structure called Z. The Z Chamber, or Z Gallery, is a mysterious structure about which little is still known today. According to Egyptologists, it is still unclear whether it is the result of a production process or if instead it had a symbolic or religious function. The independent Z researcher Mario Pinkerley had already been wondering about this strange structure years ago, and he had proposed a very different explanation. For Pinkerley, the Z was the crucial point of the Great Pyramid. In reality, the pyramid itself would have been built to protect this granite tower, which would have a very ancient origin. It would have come from Mesopotamia to Egypt, where it would initially have been placed on top of the Pyramid of Djoser, and only later inside the Great Pyramid. The Z, according to Pinkerley, is a place where time and space are altered, a place capable of generating alpha waves that communicate with the frontal lobes of the men who were placed in that sarcophagus, or basin, which is still found today in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. Here, Professor Malanga's thesis, which emerged after the discovery of these mysterious structures inside the Great Pyramid and beneath it, in some ways comes close to Pinkerley's. According to the professor, the Pyramid of Giza would be the house of life, a place where the pharaoh would go to heal and regenerate himself. The Z structure would therefore be an acoustic device, which through a system of filters would channel the sound waves generated by the wind toward the room below. According to several computer simulations carried out by the professor, these waves would be directed exactly toward the head of a person located inside the granite tub placed in the king's chamber. Furthermore, according to Professor Malanga, in order to amplify the healing properties of the low frequencies produced by the gas structure, the pyramid would have been filled with water, through which the sound waves would have been amplified and would have regenerated or healed the pharaoh, increasing his longevity.
The pharaoh, with this vibration, let's call it healing, was regenerated. If he was sick, he would be healed and would live longer. In fact, the real story, not the one told by Egyptologists, but the real story reported on the Palermo stone or on the Turin papyrus, shows that we have lost 27,000 years of Egyptian history when the first pharaohs lived for 9,000 years. Ptah, the first god pharaoh, lived for 9,000 years. The second god pharaoh, Ra, lived and reigned for 1,000 years.
Clearly, all of this goes against any official Egyptological reconstruction and may appear only as the product of an imaginative mind. But are we sure that Professor Malanga's research should be dismissed in this way? In recent years, at least 2 curious scientific discoveries have been made by 2 different research groups. Let's take a look at them together. The first was made by a team of international researchers that included engineers, architects, and archaeologists, and studied the speed of heating and cooling processes of the Great Pyramid using thermal scans. The researchers, while analyzing the data, discovered something very peculiar. In fact, they noticed that the set of stone blocks that make up the Great Pyramid, in its front part, show a uniform behavior, while 3 particular stones have higher temperatures. This thermal anomaly puzzled scientists for a long time, who eventually concluded that it can be explained by the presence of internal currents or cavities beneath the surface of the Great Pyramid. Considering that cavities do not retain heat like rock or soil does, this opens the door to several possibilities, including the presence of structural elements beneath the surface layer, which could lead to spaces or places that are currently unknown. This discovery therefore seems to validate what Malanga and Biondi claim, both that there are other rooms inside the pyramid and that beneath it there are 2 structures that would extend for about 100 meters. Another curious discovery was made by physicists from ITMO University in St. Petersburg, whose results were later published in the scientific Journal of Applied Physics. In this study, the researchers claim to have detected a very strange characteristic in the Great Pyramid. With some astonishment, the physicists actually noticed how the Great Pyramid of Giza is able to concentrate electromagnetic energy, specifically radio waves, in specific locations within the pyramid, in particular in the king's chamber, in the queen's chamber, and in the unfinished chamber at the base. This discovery led scientists to design nanoparticles inspired by the structure of the Great Pyramid, pyramidal structures capable of reproducing a similar effect in the field of optics, an effect that would now be used to make solar cells more efficient. These particular characteristics found in the Egyptian pyramids could be evidence of an ancient and advanced civilization that lived in a remote era, clues of a very ancient and mysterious civilization. After all, we find them in various places around the planet. Just think of Cuzco, with its incredible pyramids and its enigmatic megalithic walls, at Pumapunku, or the extraordinary discovery of Göbekli Tepe. But if these are just a couple of examples of places full of charm and mystery, supporting those who believe that a very ancient civilization existed in a distant past, there is a vast literature on the subject. The story of an ancient catastrophe that destroyed the ancient world is present in almost all cultures around the world. The story of ancient wise men, bearers of knowledge, who travel around the world spreading their wisdom to the peoples who survived a global catastrophe, can be found in the texts of various cultures. For example, they are called the Anunnaki in the culture of ancient Mesopotamia. In ancient Egypt, they are known as the descendants of Horus, or as watchers among the peoples of South America. And that something extraordinary really happened in the relatively recent history of our planet is also confirmed by mainstream science. Core samples taken from the Antarctic ice have actually confirmed that about 13,000 years ago, there was a sudden increase of dust, metals, and other debris in our planet's atmosphere. All elements that will seem, it's an ancient culture, it's an ancient culture. It's an ancient culture, and such a tremendous impact would have caused, in addition to a destructive event on a global scale, a radical change in the climate with a sudden cooling, which would have caused the mass extinction of numerous species of animals and plants. This period, called the Younger Dryas, would have lasted about 1,000 years. Then suddenly, due to an event that is still unclear, in the following 100 years, the climate would have warmed up and stabilized at today's levels. So, if an advanced civilization had existed before these tragic events, we would find traces of it today. As we mentioned earlier, if we look at ancient texts, we actually find various references and clues that suggest all of this could have been possible. A very ancient civilization could in fact have been destroyed by these terrible events, but it did not become completely extinct. The survivors went around the world and tried to pass on their knowledge to all those less advanced peoples who had escaped the catastrophe. Testimonies of this kind, as we know, can be found in the Old Testament of the Christian tradition, in mythology and in Indian sacred texts, in Sumerian accounts, and in the myth of Atlantis mentioned by Plato. In the Ramayana, the Hindu sacred text, for example, we read,
"The sky turned red and the earth trembled. A flood of fire fell from the sky. The whole world was destroyed."
We find the same elements, for example, in the Popol Vuh of the Mayan tradition, where the destruction of the first world is told.
"A flood came that destroyed the earth. The sky darkened and the earth trembled. The people scattered and their language became confused."
If these are just two examples of the mythological tradition of two ancient world cultures, we find evidence of comets, extinct animals, and floods in rock art representations all over the world. For example, in France, in the Lascaux Cave in Val Camonica in Italy, in the petroglyphs of Sego Canyon in the United States, or on some pillars found at the site of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. The precise dating of these carvings is uncertain, but their association with the Younger Dryas era is based on factors such as the style, the content of the carvings, and dating methods. Some of these carvings have actually been dated using the radiocarbon technique, and they have provided a precise age for their creation, which perfectly coincides with the period of the Younger Dryas. As we have just seen, there are many accounts that speak of a civilization predating those we know, as well as representations of a catastrophic event that brought this civilization to an end. But as we said at the beginning of the video, today our research focuses on the analysis of those technological markers that prove the existence of an advanced technology, at a time when such technology could not have been widespread. So let's go back to Egypt and head to Saqqara. In Saqqara, we find the pyramid of Djoser, which is considered by Egyptologists to be the oldest Egyptian pyramid that has survived to this day. The pyramid is located northeast of Memphis, the ancient capital of Egypt, and according to official reconstructions, it dates back to the 3rd dynasty, so to 2686 BC. Saqqara is also famous for the Serapeum, an underground temple dedicated to the god Apis. Inside the galleries located beneath the temple, enormous sarcophagi made from blocks of granite have been found, and they weigh up to 70 tons. These were discovered in 1851 by Auguste Mariette, a French archaeologist. And according to official reconstructions, the sarcophagi were supposed to contain the mummified remains of bulls, but in reality nothing has ever been found inside them, and the site remains shrouded in mystery to this day. But the sarcophagi of the Serapeum of Saqqara are not the only mystery present at the site. Something much simpler, seemingly trivial, challenges the reconstructions of Egyptologists and could represent that technological marker we are searching for. We are referring to the vases of Pharaoh Djoser, a collection of about 40,000 vases that the ruler of the land of the Nile, famous for the step pyramid of Saqqara, built for him by the architect Imhotep, is said to have assembled around 2800 BC. But what is so special about these vases? Before analyzing the technical data that make these artifacts unique, it is essential to remember that throughout its history, humanity has mainly shaped vases using ductile materials such as clay, terracotta, and blown glass. In some cases, more resistant materials have been used, such as alabaster, which, however, remains relatively easy to work with. Generally, craftsmen use the potter's wheel to give vases the characteristic rounded shape that we all know. The peculiarity of these artifacts found at Saqqara is that not only could they not have been made with the potter's wheel, but they are also not made with this type of material. Most of them are actually made of granite and even diorite, and this, which may seem like a minor detail, completely changes the nature of the issue. To fully understand the importance of the issue, we need to refer to the Mohs scale, which is the scale that classifies the hardness of stones. This scale was created by the German geologist Friedrich Mohs in 1812 and uses 10 reference minerals, each of which can scratch minerals with a lower hardness and can be scratched by those with a higher hardness. The hardness on this scale is defined by how a mineral can resist abrasion or deformation, and it ranges from the lowest value of 1, corresponding to talc, up to the highest value of 10, attributed to diamond, the hardest natural mineral known. The scale follows this order and ranks from the softest to the hardest: talc, gypsum, calcite, fluorite, apatite, orthoclase feldspar, quartz, topaz, corundum, and finally, diamond. Diorite, which is the material used to make the vases found in Djoser's collection, is found between the 6th and 7th position on the Mohs scale. To get an idea of the hardness of the material these vases are made of, just think that steel is in the 4th position on this scale. This means that a steel tip is not able to scratch diorite. Clearly, we're talking about hardness and not strength. It must be clear that if we hit a diorite vase with a hammer, it breaks into 1,000 pieces, while this doesn't happen with an object made of steel. So hardness is something else, and in the case of diorite, even today, we would have difficulty making similar artifacts. Diorite, or even granite, are often used to make statues or sculptures. But making a vase, even if it may seem simpler, is actually a much more complex operation. In fact, if it's already complicated to work these materials from the outside, working such hard materials from the inside, think about the inside of a vase, becomes almost impossible. And if, like the vases of Djoser, these have a narrow and elongated neck while the body is wide, even today it is impossible to understand how a primitive people could have worked them.
L'unica possibilità
That tools equipped with tips or brushes made of quartz, emerald, or diamond were used. According to archaeologists, however, the ancient Egyptians, who lived thousands of years ago, did not have such advanced tools. Furthermore, for vases characterized by a very narrow neck or a body that is particularly wide compared to the neck, even this technique would not have been applicable. Assuming hypothetically that the skilled Egyptian craftsmen had devoted themselves with extraordinary dedication to using quartz powder to shape the vases, the mystery of how they could carve the inside of the vase itself still remains. It becomes clear that due to intrinsic technical limitations, the empty space inside the vase could not have been wider than the diameter of the vase's neck. But this is not the only problem that arises. By observing the vases, you notice that they have a perfect roundness, like the one given by master potters who use the wheel. But achieving such perfect roundness by carving stone is an impossible operation. In addition to this, what is also surprising are the extremely thin engravings that, according to many experts, would have been made with tiny tips, just 0.12 millimeters in size. In short, Djoser's vases are an extraordinary puzzle, and at this point it's inevitable to wonder why the ancient Egyptians made everyday objects out of such a hard and difficult stone to work with. Did these objects perhaps have purposes and uses unknown to us? Another particular aspect is that the oldest vases, those attributed to the most ancient dynasties, are made of diorite, while those from the more recent dynasties are made with softer materials, as if the technique or the purpose for which the oldest vases were made had been lost. But this is not a new aspect in ancient Egyptian culture. We also find this in the pyramids, where we see that those with a more complex construction are the ones attributed to the oldest dynasties. Just think of the Great Pyramid. Those attributed to the more recent dynasties appear much less elaborate, and many of them today are nothing more than piles of stones. And what if we assumed that the pyramids are not, as Egyptologists claim, the tombs where the pharaohs were buried, but that they had functions unknown to us? It is plausible that Djoser's vases are not just simple containers, but that their incredible peculiarities had specific purposes that we are unaware of. And this would explain another puzzling fact: the place where these extraordinary artifacts were found. Djoser's pyramid stands out from the others because of its unique stepped shape, a real anomaly compared to the regular pyramids we are used to. But the aspect that makes it even more enigmatic, and that many people don't know about, is the underground complex hidden beneath it. A network of tunnels stretches for about 6 kilometers, branching out from a central chamber located 28 meters deep and with a diameter of about 7 meters. Egyptologists believe that these underground chambers and rooms were used for the burial of Pharaoh Djoser, but it goes without saying that the pharaoh's body has never been found inside them, nor any artifacts that could clearly indicate that this structure had a funerary purpose. Something entirely different was found in its depths, specifically in 1920, when the exploration of the deepest shafts, about 50 meters underground, led to the discovery of an unexpected treasure: the 40,000 stone vases of various shapes and sizes that we have talked about so far. These artifacts have remained perfectly preserved for thousands of years, but why hide them deep underground in the pyramid? What were these vases used for? A possible clue can be found in the numerous stories of mysterious deaths, relentless misfortunes, and inexplicable events that struck anyone who dared to disturb the eternal rest of the pharaohs. The most famous case is undoubtedly that of Tutankhamun, whose curse has become legendary around the world, shrouding ancient Egypt in mystery and fueling unsettling theories. In 1922, after years of searching, the British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun, the pharaoh who lived during the 18th dynasty and died at the age of just 19. Tutankhamun's reign was actually very brief. His life was cut short at a young age by a mysterious illness, but he became one of the most famous pharaohs of ancient Egypt thanks to the discovery of his tomb, which remained intact for millennia. But that's not all. A terrible legend claims that everyone who had anything to do with this extraordinary discovery was struck by a curse that soon led them to their deaths. And this happened exactly a few weeks after the discovery, when Lord Carnarvon, the financier of Carter's research, died from an unspecified illness that presented symptoms of blood poisoning and pneumonia. But this was only the first in a series of mysterious deaths that struck researchers, tomb raiders, and ordinary workers who had worked at the archaeological site. So is there a connection between these enigmatic deaths and the curse that the ancient Egyptians prophesied would fall upon anyone who violated these sacred places? According to researcher Ross Fellows, yes, and the cause would be attributed to radiation poisoning that affected everyone who participated in the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, but not only them. Many men and women actually paid with their lives for their thirst for knowledge. Carter himself, for example, a few years after the discovery, would die from a very aggressive lymphoma. Clearly, Fellows' theory is undoubtedly extraordinary, but as we will see later, it is not the result of mere speculation, but is supported by facts and concrete data that we are sure will capture your attention and will not leave you indifferent.
Those who break into this tomb will meet death from an illness that no doctor can diagnose.
A study conducted between 1999 and 2005 showed how the incidence of hematopoietic tumors, that is, those whose primary causes include exposure to radiation, is proportionally higher in Egypt than in any other country with the same environmental conditions. This incidence has been vaguely attributed to factors related to modern lifestyles such as diet and industrial pollutants. However, this view has been firmly refuted by evidence from ancient Egypt. Forensic studies actually confirm an unexpectedly high incidence of hematopoietic tumors, even in ancient Egypt. The analysis of skeletons from various places and periods has revealed examples of multiple osteolytic lesions, from myeloma, degenerative joint diseases, cranial porosity, and nasopharyngeal carcinoma at much higher rates compared to modern populations. This, according to several researchers, strongly disproves the idea that such tumors are only a modern disease. A further study analyzed the causes of death of about 500 Egyptologists who worked at archaeological sites during a period between 1800 and the 2000s. From the analysis of this data, many early and sudden deaths emerge, and among these, we also find several illustrious victims. In addition to the already mentioned Carter and Carnarvon, we find Jean-François Champollion, famous for his translations, who spent many years studying the texts inside the pyramids of Saqqara, until, in 1932, he died at the age of 41 from exhaustion and apoplexy, along with 5 of his companions. Auguste Mariette, a pioneer of the excavations at Saqqara, suffered from various illnesses and near blindness before collapsing from a violent hemorrhage and dying at the age of 59. The eminent British Egyptologist Walter Bryan Emery spent many years excavating in search of artifacts, until he collapsed inside a tomb at Saqqara and died within a few hours. The American archaeologist George Reisner spent years excavating the mastabas of Giza, until at the age of 75, he collapsed inside the Great Pyramid and died of suspected poisoning. But among the suspicious deaths, we also find that of one of the most famous historical figures in human history, Napoleon Bonaparte. It's probably just speculation or simply a historical curiosity. But Napoleon Bonaparte actually led a military and scientific expedition to Egypt, during which he explored its ancient ruins. And according to some accounts, he even spent the night inside the Great Pyramid. Napoleon would die at just 51 years old after suffering for months from nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and blood clots, which the post-mortem autopsy would attribute to stomach cancer. We repeat once again that this could just be speculation, but the data examined in this study shows that out of 500 cases analyzed of researchers who had actively worked at some sites in ancient Egypt, as many as 119 would die from sudden and not entirely explained illnesses. To this, we must add that the exact cause of death, especially in the oldest cases, was often not reported at all, or was linked to generic symptoms reported by the patient rather than to a precise forensic examination. Furthermore, it should be added that certain types of tumors were not known in ancient times. Leukemia, for example, was only defined in the mid-1800s, and lymphoma only at the end of the 19th century. So what do these data show? Were the researchers who contributed to the discoveries in ancient Egypt victims of some unspecified radiation poisoning? Or are these just simple coincidences? To better understand the issue raised by Fellows, we need to take a step back and analyze some specific peculiarities of the ancient Egyptian civilization. In ancient Egypt, death was not simply an end, but a passage to another existence, a divine realm where the pharaoh, like Osiris, the sun god, joined the gods. The mastaba, the monumental tomb with a truncated pyramid shape, was the sacred place where this miraculous event took place. According to legend, Osiris, after being killed by his brother Seth, was resurrected thanks to the intervention of his wife Isis and his son Horus. His body was prepared with magical rituals and placed inside a stone chest. Transformed into incandescent light, Osiris ascended to the sky, reuniting with his father, Ra. This is a religious and humanized interpretation of a very ancient rite, which essentially reinterprets something that perhaps the ancient Egyptians could not fully understand. The body of Osiris, in fact, during the preparation for the rite, was fed with supposed cakes and beer, after which it was placed inside a stone chamber where it magically transformed into incandescent light and ascended to the sky to join the Father God. The earliest Egyptians of the Old Kingdom believed that this process was literally and physically real, carried out through alchemy or magic, and that it could not be understood by the common man. After the interruption of the First Intermediate Period, common Egyptians inherited the funerary literature of the Old Kingdom, which was said to contain great secrets. In fact, the ancient texts warned against revealing their mysteries.
Do not show it to anyone else. It is a true mystery that no one anywhere knows.
The Book of the Dead also made a distinction between the former kings of the Old Kingdom and the rest of humanity, portrayed as common people. The means that allowed this transformation and ascent to the sky was the invisible efflux contained in the magical offerings. Osiris, for example, declares in the coffin text,
I have power through offerings. I proceed by means of the efflux. By means of magic, take the efflux, so you will not be inert. Proceed from the burning fire. I have eaten the magic of the spirits of magical food. The souls are in me. The shadows are in me. I am transformed into powerful spirits. I shine in the sun from the efflux. I am the Ancient One. My soul possesses the power in its primordial form.
In Egyptian funerary texts, these offerings were called kifa, a magical food that plays a crucial role in the pharaoh's resurrection process. Described as cakes and beer or bread and milk, this food was not just a ritual offering, but a key element for the transformation of the sovereign's body. Among the magical foods, saffron cakes had a particular importance, symbolizing the eye of Horus, the god of the sky. These cakes were offered to Osiris to nourish his soul and to prepare it for his journey toward eternity. In the coffin text, a series of spells describes in detail the preparation and consumption of this magical food. The efflux, an energetic substance coming from the food, was associated with the movement of the sun and was administered in specific portions. But what was this magical food that had the potential to make the pharaoh's soul transcend all the way to the heights of the sky? Surprisingly, some researchers have found a curious analogy between the description of the sifa, described in Egyptian texts and considered magical food, and the processes of modern nuclear technology. Yellowcake, the raw mineral of uranium, 235, the main nuclear fuel, actually has characteristics similar to the magical food described in ancient texts. However, raw yellowcake is not enough to cause a nuclear reaction, and it must be enriched to a higher concentration. This process makes it absorbable, turning the substance into the form of a chilled milky liquid. This milky aspect seems to be cryptically described in the coffin texts, where the process appears to refer to the purification of the magical food and its preparation for consumption by Osiris.
Osiris received the milky fluid from the breast of Isis. He received the outflow from the cold drink, the outflow of decomposition. The cold drink is yours. The outflow is yours. The powers are in it.
The body of the pharaoh, therefore, nourished with these specific elements, would then trigger a reaction that would produce an intense light and extreme heat. The physical evidence found inside the Great Pyramid surprisingly seems to support this incredible theory. The inner walls of the king's chamber were initially reported as polished marble because they reflected the light of the explorers' torches. But in reality, it was later understood that it was vitrified granite caused by an extreme heat source. The stone sarcophagus is made of ordinary gray granite, but its surface has an unnatural dark brown color, as if it had been baked by intense heat, and the edges show signs of melting. This heat, according to some scholars, could have been generated by a nuclear reaction triggered by the Cephao. This uranium-based technology would also have produced radioactive waste products, which would have been managed through burial, and there is both textual and physical evidence of this practice. In the Egyptian legend, for example, it is said that upon the death of Osiris, the pieces of his body were placed in a lead-lined coffin and buried deep underwater. This description is consistent with the structure of the so-called Tomb of Osiris at Giza, which consists of a 30-meter deep vertical shaft filled with water, at the bottom of which there was a dacite sarcophagus weighing about 40 tons. The basalt caskets on the second level, about 20 meters deep, were examined with a Geiger counter and were found to be intensely radioactive, especially on the inside. Also in Giza, specifically in the warehouses, in the basement in the Valley of Chephren, and on the second level of the shaft of the Tomb of Osiris, which we just told you about. Unusually high levels of radiation have been detected, while in several underground tombs in Saqqara, radon has instead been detected, which is a radioactive gas emitted during the decay phases of uranium. These radioactive levels, which are considered higher than the normal radioactivity present in the soil, suggest that these sites could actually have been places designated for the storage of radioactive waste. And they undoubtedly invite further analysis. This theory also seems to be confirmed by ancient texts found in Egypt, where it is clearly stated that the body of Osiris, or rather what was left of it, was to be considered waste material, and humanity is warned to stay away from these remains as harmful spirits would be present. But Fellow's study does not stop here. He goes in search of further evidence and analyzes the mastabas, the monumental tombs used during the early phases of Egyptian civilization. The mastaba tombs of ancient Egypt are an intricate enigma and apparently have none of what we might expect from a burial. No mummies, no skeletons, no elaborate funerary goods. At first, they were just simple holes in the ground. Then, over time, they turned into real monuments. Raised rectangular structures with 2 inner rooms and a deep shaft leading to an underground burial chamber. But the strangest thing is that these mastabas were all the same. No matter how important the deceased was, their tomb always had the same identical appearance. And there weren't even any decorations, at least at the beginning, just simple stones bare of any ornamentation. Archaeologists have found all sorts of things in the mastabas: statues, everyday objects, even votive offerings, but not a trace of a mummy, a skeleton, or a bone. So, where did the bodies go? The very etymology of the term mastaba could, however, give us another clue. In Arabic, the word mastaba means bench or table. This association began with early European archaeologists who used names given by local workers. However, the shape and function of these structures do not resemble a bench at all, and this prompted researchers to conduct further studies, which revealed that mastaba would derive from the ancient Persian bank, meaning bunker or vault, a term that definitely fits these structures better, as they are characterized by underground spaces and hidden chambers. Furthermore, bank does not refer to a bench in the sense of a seat, but rather to a safe place to store something valuable or dangerous. The primary and original function of Egyptian mastabas was to store large quantities of offerings in ceramic containers for a very long period of time. Over time, the belief developed that these offerings, such as beer or wine, were intended for religious rituals, to appease the gods or assist the deceased in their passage to the afterlife. However, this interpretation was influenced by later religious practices and by Egyptologists from the Euro-Christian period who misinterpreted depictions of processions as funeral ceremonies. In reality, the original offerings were not drinks and were not presented ceremonially on an altar, but were simply stored in underground chambers. A notable example, for instance, is that of the mastaba, which stood at Saqqara and was extended into a much larger multi-layered structure, and today we know it as the Pyramid of Djoser. During the reign of Pharaoh Djoser, thousands of jars were moved from Abydos to Saqqara into a new storage area located beneath the step pyramid. This move was not a ceremonial act, but rather a large-scale operation known as replenishment. In short, it was as if the site of Abydos, where these mysterious jars were originally kept, had deteriorated over the centuries and needed to be replaced. This led to the relocation of about 40,000 jars that were placed in deep tunnels dug beneath the Pyramid of Djoser. This operation is described on the famine stela, which says that Pharaoh Djoser saved the country from a terrible famine, worsened by a plague that was killing the people. But what triggered this plague? Is there a correlation with the site of Abydos where the mysterious jars were kept? However, the study we are analyzing might provide us with a more realistic answer. In fact, the jars did not contain food, but it is much more likely that they contained some kind of mud or mortar. This kind of mud, it was perhaps the radioactive waste caused by the use of uranium during the rites of ascension to the sky. It was the presence of this radioactive mud which escaped from the site of Abydos that caused the mysterious epidemic during the reign of Pharaoh Djoser. And finally, this was the real reason why these jars were made with a hard material that's nearly impossible to work, like diorite. To answer these questions, Fellows' research invites us to reconsider the interpretation of some ancient symbols found on the labels of the jars from Abydos. But before we look at this symbolism together, we need to make a preliminary point. Modern physics distinguishes between two types of radiation, alpha and beta particles and gamma rays. Alpha particles are relatively large, slow, and not very penetrating, while beta particles are very small, highly active, and moderately penetrating. Gamma rays, on the other hand, travel only in straight lines. They are highly penetrating and very harmful to bone marrow, and their exposure causes hematopoietic tumors. The ancient Egyptian system had two types of soul entities that emerged from the remains of the dead body of Osiris, the Ba and the Ka. The Ba was initially represented as the abstract symbol of a bird. The labels on the jars from Abydos distinguish two types of birds that, interestingly, resemble the modern designation of alpha and beta particle radiation. Following this logic, we can say that alpha radiation was represented as a large and slow goose, while beta radiation was represented as a small and agile bird, often depicted as escaping up the vertical shaft of the mastaba. The Ka, which we can associate with gamma rays, was considered much more powerful and dangerous. At first, it was represented as the head of a snake, and later as raised human arms and hands. As we know, radioactive waste is very dangerous also because it lasts a long time, like technetium, which has a decay time of 211,000 years. It's again interesting to note how the drawings on Egyptian mastabas show large numbers of specific birds. For example, 111,000 doves, 11,100 generic birds, or 120,000 ducks or geese. These large numbers suggest the existence of a code that indicates the expected lifespan of all the waste stored in the mastaba wells. Another interesting fact is that in the mastaba, the burial chamber was offset from the shaft, as if to limit the escape of gamma rays, which, as we have seen, only travel in a straight line. The murals of the mastaba also showed some smaller Ba birds escaping up the vertical shaft. In the raised covering, the inner chamber was positioned directly above the underground burial chamber. This was the shortest distance to detect possible gamma ray leaks. This chamber contained a Ka symbol, indicating that it was for the Ka. The chamber was also ventilated by small holes placed at the top and was used to hold live birds that acted as canaries in the mine to detect possible K leaks. Numerous texts refer to the continuous delivery of live birds to the mastaba, probably the sacred ibis. The historian Josephus Flavius, for example, recorded that the ancient Egyptians used caged ibises to detect evil snakes. Birds, as we know, are known to be extremely sensitive to radiation. Following all these clues, we can hypothesize that the mastaba was designed to safely store and manage radioactive waste for millions of years. Its structure and functioning actually appear to be the result of a deep knowledge of radioactivity and its dangers. The deep burial chamber was actually dug 30 meters deep into the rock to create a physical barrier against the escape of radiation, especially gamma rays. The radioactive waste was contained in very hard and dense stone vessels, similar to sarcophagi, most likely to prevent the escape of penetrating radiation. The second outer chamber contained a sort of shelf used to present food offerings. This was a second ingenious strategy to detect the presence of sterilizing gamma radiation. If, in fact, the food placed on the shelf did not decompose normally, it was a clear sign of dangerous radiation. The tombs of the first and second dynasties at Abydos appear simpler. They are often just shallow pits with little or no covering. As various pieces of evidence seem to suggest, it was precisely this lack of protection that led to radioactive leaks. To confirm all this, several Egyptian texts mention Abydos as the site for refining and enriching the magical flow, suggesting that radioactive materials might have been handled in this place. The History of Egypt by Manetho instead describes a severe plague during the reign of Jet, which might have been caused precisely by exposure to radiation. Abydos. Furthermore, hundreds of secondary tombs have been found containing young people aged 20 to 25, apparently in good health, who might have died from radiation poisoning. Finally, studies carried out on skeletons from the Old Kingdom have shown a significant incidence of degenerative joint disorders and cranial porosity, conditions that can be caused by exposure to radiation as well as by famine or plague. But if these clues point toward the use of radioactive materials in ancient Egypt, then how much can we really trust the official dating of this civilization? The technology required to handle such dangerous materials could indicate a level of scientific advancement that does not match traditional timelines. Early 1900s, a series of archaeological excavations draws the world's attention to Egypt. In 1923, in the Valley of the Kings, located on the west bank of the Nile across from Luxor, the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun was discovered. The discovery, after years of fruitless searches, was made by the British archaeologist Howard Carter. The burial chamber appears intact and contains all the precious artifacts that had remained preserved for over 3,000 years. Clearly, this discovery made headlines around the world and sparked interest in ancient Egypt, leading to a new wave of archaeological explorations. A few years later, the archaeologist Selim Hassan announced an incredible discovery during some excavations on the Giza Plateau. In fact, he reportedly identified a network of mysterious underground tunnels. Hassan's Giza excavations were some of the largest ever in the area, and they led to the discovery of the tomb of Queen Ediphares, the mother of Khufu, the presumed builder of the Great Pyramid. The tomb contained a series of important artifacts, including a small statue of the Sphinx. Hassan also found the remains of a small city that had first served as housing for the workers who built the monuments and later for the priests who served the tombs and temples. But in particular, Hassan discovered in the raised road that connects the Sphinx with the second pyramid, a very deep well that was called the Water Well, or the Well of Osiris. The well begins in the covered passage under the raised road and leads to a wide corridor with another well at the end. This second well descends into a rectangular chamber with several niches containing sarcophagi. The wells contained successive and intrusive burials from the 26th dynasty. In one of the niches, there was also a third well that descended much deeper, down to another level. At the well's bottom, a chamber was nearly submerged in water. Hassan tried unsuccessfully to empty the chamber by pumping water for 4 years until he finally had to give up digging. However, the water was clear enough to see that the submerged chamber contained the remains of 4 pillars with a large sarcophagus in the center. Hassan's work proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Sphinx was not just a standalone statue, but was part of a much larger complex that included temples and other mysterious underground structures. The discovery was widely reported by the press at the time, but suddenly and without warning, the media stopped talking about it. The Egyptian authorities diverted attention to other initiatives, and archaeologists went back to focusing on tombs and treasures. Why did they stop investigating these very important discoveries? According to some researchers, there was a deliberate intention to cover everything up, because what might be hidden beneath the Giza Plateau could change everything we think we know about this ancient people. But what could be hidden under the desert sands that is so shocking? To understand this, we need to take a step back and go to ancient Greece.
There I saw 12 regularly arranged palaces connected to each other, separated by terraces and arranged around 12 rooms. It's hard to believe they are man-made. The walls are covered with carved figures, and each patio is exquisitely built in white marble and surrounded by columns. Near the corner where the labyrinth ends, there is a 70-meter-high pyramid with large carved figures of animals and an underground passage through which you can enter. I was credibly told that the underground chambers and passages connected this pyramid with the pyramids of Giza.
These are the words that Herodotus, the Greek historian considered the father of history, uses to describe this mysterious place, of which today we have no trace. A place used to store countless texts and ancient scrolls and protect them from the ravages of time that, according to testimonies, contained all the archaic knowledge of the Egyptian people. But Herodotus is not the only witness to these incredible structures. Iamblichus of Chalcis, the Syrian philosopher who lived in 300 BC, describes in detail a path that, passing through the body of the Sphinx, would have led to the Great Pyramid of Giza.
This entrance, now blocked by sand and debris, can still be traced between the front paws of the Sphinx. Previously, it was closed by a bronze door whose secret opening could only be operated by the Magi. It was closed to the public, and a kind of religious fear preserved its inviolability better than any armed guard could have.
But there are many accounts of these very ancient and mysterious underground places. For example, the Roman historian Pliny spoke about them in the 1st century AD. He writes that beneath the Sphinx there is a tomb of a prince named Harmachis, which contains a magnificent treasure. Surprisingly, in several ancient texts, the Sphinx was once identified specifically as the Great Sphinx Harmachis and was associated with the Egyptian god Harmachis. The 4th century Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus
instead writes about the inscriptions that the ancients carved on the walls of some underground galleries. They indicate that these passages were built deep underground to preserve ancient wisdom lost in the Great Flood.
But even more extraordinary is the testimony of the Arab historian, geographer, and encyclopedist Masudi, who lived around the turn of the 9th and 10th centuries AD. He writes that in the underground tunnels beneath Giza, there are statues of mechanical guardians placed to defend the structure and its precious contents.
The writings, records of wisdom and achievements in various arts and sciences were deeply hidden. They could remain as documents for the benefit of those who might one day be able to understand them.
We can't help but wonder what is real in these accounts and whether they were just the product of the imagination of these renowned authors. Because over the years many historians have talked about it. To try to answer this question, we need to take a leap in time and go to the early 1990s. In 1991, an expedition led by the Egyptologist John Anthony West and the geologist Robert Schoch set out for the Giza Plateau, with the aim of examining the possibility that there were hidden secret chambers underground. The research group, using sophisticated seismic instruments, sent sound waves deep into the ground near the Sphinx, and the returning vibrations revealed the presence of inexplicable anomalies in the ground. The analysis suggested the possibility of hidden cavities and vertical shafts. This discovery caused a great stir and raised many questions. Where could they lead? What secrets could they give access to? The possibility of discovering buried chambers or even an entire underground complex fueled the expedition's enthusiasm and sparked the interest of the whole world. But before anyone could try to answer these questions, the Egyptian authorities, led by the Chief Inspector of Antiquities, Dr. Zahi Hawass, intervened to halt the research because they were considered speculative and unscientific, even though something interesting might still have been found. This was confirmed a few years later by a Japanese research group that, in collaboration with the Egyptian authorities, launched a new study. Using radar technology and thermography, they also confirmed that beneath the Sphinx, there were significant anomalies in the ground, suggesting the presence of cavities and underground chambers. But once again, the research was suspended and did not lead to any concrete results. This reluctance on the part of the Egyptian authorities to undertake thorough studies to determine the nature of these anomalies, and the contradictory attitude of Zahi Hawass, who sometimes seems to confirm the possibility of the existence of underground chambers and sometimes seems to deny them, it has caused resentment and suspicions about the real intentions to get to the bottom of the matter. After all, the idea that the Sphinx could be traversed by passageways leading into the depths of the Giza Plateau is not a far-fetched hypothesis. As we have seen, there are many accounts from historians in the past that confirm their existence, but these are not the only ones. In 1798, the French archaeologist and artist Vivant Denon drew an image of the Sphinx showing a man coming out of a hole located on the statue's head. In the 1920s, on the other hand, an aerial photograph taken from a hot air balloon shows a hole on the top of the Sphinx's head. In addition to the accounts of historians, there is therefore concrete evidence supporting the hypothesis that the Sphinx may contain one or more passages inside it that lead underground. But the Egyptian authorities at the moment continue to rule out this possibility. Historical accounts, on the other hand, claim that beneath the surface of the Giza Plateau, there is a real underground city, which could be accessed from inside the Sphinx. Stairs carved into the rock would lead to a huge system of tunnels, caves, and rooms located beneath the archaeological site. The enormous and complex underground system would extend eastward toward the city of Cairo, and the large number of excavations carried out during the 20th century would have highlighted the real possibility of its existence. As we saw earlier, already in the early 1900s, Hassan had identified a series of underground wells located between the Sphinx and the pyramids. But these structures would not be a unique feature of the Giza Plateau. The study of the vast archaeological site of Awara, for example, which includes the pyramid and numerous surrounding structures, it would have also highlighted the presence of underground chambers and tunnels at this site. This suggests the existence of a complex network underground. But even today, this is still unexplored. If the existence of a system of underground chambers and tunnels seems to be supported by historical accounts and studies carried out in recent years, even today, all of this is questioned, and according to some researchers, even hindered by the Egyptian authorities. But the mysteries surrounding the Sphinx don't end there. Another unresolved question is the origin of this extraordinary monument. The research that West carried out in the 1990s revealed not only a series of underground chambers and tunnels, but also something surprising. Until then, the age of the Sphinx was estimated to be about 4,500 years, dating back to the dynasty of Khufu around 2500 BC. However, the geological investigations conducted by West, in collaboration with the geologist Schock, suggested that the Sphinx might have been carved many years earlier, probably more than 10,000 years ago, when the Sahara was still an area subject to heavy rainfall, a period that would correspond to the end of the last ice age. This caused West and Schock to date the Sphinx's construction earlier for several reasons. Thanks to Schock's geological expertise, it was possible to highlight how the erosion of the Sphinx's rock is different from what we might expect to detect in a desert environment like the Giza Plateau. In fact, the erosion appears deep and irregular, and it seems more consistent with the marks left by heavy rains or floods. Moreover, the erosion observed on the Sphinx is significantly different from that found on the surrounding pyramids, while the pyramids show erosion consistent with that caused by wind and sand. The Sphinx, on the other hand, shows signs of wear that are incompatible with those caused by wind and sand, but compatible with those caused by water. This would indicate, without further doubt, that the Sphinx may have been built in a different era than the pyramids. So to recap, according to official archaeology, it would have been erected in 2500 BC, more or less 5,000 years ago. We also know that the climate in Egypt has been dry for at least 9,000 years. The Sphinx shows signs of water erosion that reach up to almost half a meter. What should this make us assume about the Sphinx? To have these signs of erosion, it must have been built in a much earlier period. According to some estimates, in fact, for water to cause this type of erosion, it would take 50,000 years. To this, we must add another piece of evidence. The stone quarries from which we know the Egyptian dynasties extracted the large limestone blocks show no signs of water erosion, as is to be expected since for at least 5,000 years, the Giza Plateau has had a desert climate. So, what mysterious atmospheric phenomenon caused erosion on the Sphinx but spared the stone quarries? Something about this whole story doesn't add up. Another indication of the Sphinx's much greater age has to do with its placement. In 1828, during a trip to Egypt, the German astronomer and mathematician Johann Friedrich Gauss was among the first to notice that the position of the pyramids on the Giza Plateau seemed to reproduce that of the stars that make up the belt of the constellation Orion. This observation has been developed over the years, and several independent researchers have refined this, starting from Gauss' initial insight, and after several studies, they came to describe the Giza Plateau as a true representation of celestial order on Earth. The Pyramid of Khufu would in fact represent the star Alnitak, the easternmost of the three main stars in Orion's belt, and would depict the pharaoh as king on Earth. The Pyramid of Khafre would instead represent the star Al-Nilam, the central one of the three stars in the belt, and this would symbolize the pharaoh as the representative of the sun god, Ra. The Pyramid of Menkaure would finally symbolize the star Mintaka, the westernmost of the three stars in the belt, and would portray the pharaoh as the god of the underworld. The Sphinx, on the other hand, faces east towards the star Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. Sirius was associated with the goddess Isis, wife and sister of Osiris. The body of the Sphinx is also that of a lion, a sacred animal in ancient Egypt, representing strength and power. The Sphinx's placement at the Giza Plateau entrance symbolizes the pharaoh's role as guardian of the underworld. And finally, we have the Nile, which flows from south to north, parallel to Orion's belt in the alignment theory. The Nile would represent the celestial river, the Milky Way that crosses the night sky. Today, due to precession, Orion's belt is slightly shifted to the east, but 10,500 years ago when, according to the Orion alignment theory, the Giza complex would have been designed. Precession would have caused Orion's belt to be in a position perfectly aligned with the pyramids and the Nile River. Clearly, if we accept all this, we would have to date the entire complex back many years. But the hypothesis that sees the Sphinx as much older than its current dating would seem to be confirmed. Egyptian, found in 1850 and known as the Inventory Stele. In this tablet, it is stated that the Sphinx was not built by Khufu, as Egyptologists believe, but rather that the pharaoh simply restored it.
His Majesty had the statue restored, which is located in front of the Temple of Kem in Giza, after it had been neglected for long periods of time.
The Sphinx, therefore, was already an ancient monument 5,000 years ago that needed to be restored. And at this point, after highlighting all these incredible anomalies, we can't help but wonder who really built the Sphinx. If what we have presented to you so far are well-defined elements that can be analyzed by anyone, to continue our story and try to answer this question, we need to go further and venture some hypotheses. The Sphinx seems to have been erected by a very ancient people, a people who lived during the last ice age. And what if we accept as true what is written in the Temple of Edfu? But not only that, also from some historical accounts that come from ancient Greece. These people would have originated on a mysterious island located in the Atlantic Ocean, a place that would have been wiped out by a destructive cataclysm. Those who follow our work know that we have talked about this hypothesis in several videos that you can find on the channel. They had a great influence on Egyptian civilization and are certainly older. We find the Sumerians. Sumerian mythology tells of beings with divine features, the Anunnaki, who came down from the sky and possessed great wisdom and highly advanced technology. Some researchers believe that these beings described in mythology were not deities, but rather a people from the stars, equipped with very advanced technology, and that they landed on Earth in search of natural resources, useful for the development of their civilization. It's definitely fascinating to read some Sumerian texts like Gilgamesh, where the existence of great underground cities is described, accessible through tunnels hidden beneath the sand, or to read about the existence of the Huwawa, gigantic beings with the head of a lion and a terrifying appearance, whose specific task was to guard the sacred places. The description of these particular beings inevitably brings to mind the incredible account of the Arab historian Masudi that we saw earlier, and the terrifying mechanical statues placed to guard the underground chambers on the Giza Plateau.
I have seen things that I cannot describe for fear of making people doubt my intelligence, but I have seen them.
But the depiction of beings with the head of a lion is not new in ancient Egypt. Some researchers believe that the Sphinx's head itself was originally that of a lion, and that it was modified over the years. So, could there be a connection between these facts? Clearly, we don't know. However, what we do know is that the ancient origins of the Sphinx open up fascinating new possibilities. Who built it? An advanced civilization that was wiped out by a catastrophic event? Or is it instead evidence of an ancient contact with a people from the stars? And finally, what is hidden in the depths of the Giza Plateau? Our hope is that new excavations and research can reveal the mysteries not only about these enigmatic structures, shedding light on an ancient people whose traces seem to have been lost. Many questions remain unanswered, and many aspects deserve further investigation in the future. But at this point, we are really curious to know your opinion and to hear your suggestions. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support our work. See you in the next story.